Welcome to r/NuclearRevenge, in which we read stories of people being wronged by evil people, and then we follow them along the process and journey of getting even and get back at those who did something horrible. I do not know about you, but in my personal opinion, it's rather refreshing to see people being held accountable for their horrid actions, especially when they are committed against kind people taken advantage of and taken for granted. This story is titled, "My fiancé cheated with several men, including a sex offender, so I took my revenge." Sorry, not sorry. I'm writing these lines during the year 2024 in the month of February, at the very beginning. I met my ex in 2012, right after I had just turned 30. I had only dated and been with women exclusively until I came out as bisexual at the age of 28. Let's just say the year I was 29 was a busy year making up for what I missed out on. It was mostly casual hookups, yes, safe. And I did try dating 2 different guys for a few weeks, but it just never worked out or got serious. I kinda figured that I would probably end up marrying a woman or not getting married at all because I just didn't see myself catching romantic and sexual feelings for a guy. Then I met Ryan. From the first date, it was just like the only other time in my life I have fallen in love. Butterflies, constantly thinking about him, wanting to spend every moment with him. He fell for me hard too, and we became an item. Though he did say, while he considered my bisexuality a turn-on because he had a thing for straight guys, it also gave him pause because of my desires for the opposite sex and his concern it may lead me astray. I thought about it and I understood it was a legitimate worry, but I assured him that I couldn't even think about anyone else because I was really into him. Note: I knew he was the one by the end of the first month, and I was in love, but I wasn't going to say those things too soon and risk scaring him off. On our first date, he admitted to me that he was legally blind due to a genetic disorder, and that it was progressive, and eventually he would only have a sliver of his peripheral vision. He immediately said that he understood if I didn't want to see him again because no other guy had wanted to date him and be his driver all of the time. I grew up with a brother in a wheelchair who never learned how to walk or talk due to a misdiagnosed meningitis at 6 months old back in the 70s. I told him that and said that what my brother had was a severe disability. So in my perspective, his blindness had no effect in my feelings, and that always being the driver was a small sacrifice just to be with him. The following years were bliss. We brought out the best in each other. My family, who was surprised but very supportive when I came out, adored Ryan and treated him like family and said that I acted happier since we had been together. When I met him, he was working part-time in retail and had done very poorly in high school because he lost all of his confidence as soon as his vision deteriorated. I told him that one thing I did insist on was that he do something with his life because he had too much to offer and that would help. He said that he had wanted to be a teacher but didn't think someone with limited vision could teach. Nonsense! So I put him through community college for 2 years, then 2.5 years, then 2.5 years of a local university, and finally the 1-year teacher certification program as required by California. I drove countless miles and paid hundreds in public transportation costs for him, never blinking an eye or complaining. We had been together for 7.5 years and we were engaged to be married in October by the time he was in his last semester of his teaching certification, which involved him student teaching at his former high school with his favorite teacher from his days in school. Then the pandemic hit and schools closed. Fortunately, he had enough hours in the classroom that he would qualify to be certified after the governor issued a waiver via executive order. On the third day of the stay-at-home order in March, my life crumbled when I innocently found out he had cheated on me with an ex, all because he had handed his phone to me to show me something on Instagram. I accidentally fat-thumbed the back arrow when he gave it to me, taking me back to a list of all his messages. I looked and I recognized the name of his ex as the second message, dated a week ago. I clicked on it and my heart sank. Directions to my house, pictures, dirty talk, and reassuring him not to worry about me because he had my location on my Find My Friends, just in case I came home from work. I immediately started screaming, demanding to know everything, and he admitted to having his ex over twice for sex, and that they didn't use protection. His ex was engaged to his girlfriend during this, adding another victim. Then he admitted to sleeping with a straight but curious recently single cousin twice. Again, no protection. Finally, he admitted to sleeping with a supposedly straight guy he and many of my cousins went to school with, who I told Ryan I really didn't like him or want them talking because I didn't trust him after what I had read about him. Since they were never close friends, I didn't feel like this was a big sacrifice or that I was being too controlling, and I assumed that he knew why, and all my cousins felt that way, but I didn't bother repeating it. The reason was, after high school at age 20, this guy was convicted of sexual assault and penetration with a foreign object against a 16-year-old girl and had gone to jail and required to register as a sex offender for life. Apparently, my ex was the only person in his graduating class that hadn't heard that news. All of this happened in my home while I was working. We spent the whole weekend crying, with me asking over and over why, and him repeatedly crying and saying he just didn't know and that he felt terrible. Monday comes around and anger started being as common as sadness, as I made a comment that said I was going to pull all the phone records going back to the 3 years that AT&T kept them for a fee. Only when he heard that did he admit to one more guy, some random named Frankie of the gay hookup app Grindr, who was the first guy he cheated with and continued to casually hook up for nearly 2 years, with the last time being in February, the month before. He told me how it started. Now get this, it was the day after his graduation with his BA in May 2018 that he was drunk from celebrating and wanted to have sex. I too had been celebrating with him and said I was too drunk to perform and said I would make it up the next day, then passed out and I slept on the couch. Apparently, he was angry horny because he downloaded Grindr, chatted with this Frankie fellow, and arranged to have sex in his car in a church parking lot across the street from our condo, which happens to be across the street from a school. This fact is important later. All while I slept on the couch. All the times they hooked up after that was again in my condo while I was working or visiting a friend for the night up the coast. He used to love going, but started saying he couldn't occasionally because of homework or studying. I absolutely lost it. I told him to get in the car and I drove him to his family's house so he could tell them what he did so they understood why he was moving back into their house. While he was in the house, I was in the driveway on the phone with AT&T ordering the 3 years worth of detail called texts and logs. Then I made an appointment to be screened for sexually transmitted infections. I suspended his service until he could figure out how to pay for his own damn phone. Then I temporarily changed all his passwords on the social media accounts he cheated with and to make sure he couldn't hide more evidence, so only I would have access to his clout. We shared each other's passwords on his suggestions years before. I also called the bank and I issued a stop payment on his final tuition check that I had sent to the certification program the week before and hadn't hit the bank yet. Before deleting his social media, except Facebook, I took screenshots of the entire Instagram conversation with his ex, and I mailed the conversation to his fiancé, who deserved to know, so he could see a doctor and get tested too. His family was very religious and had kicked him out on high school for 3 days when he tried to admit he was bi, and only took him back in when he took it back. Needless to say, she ended it. He got kicked out, 1 down. He came back out to the car and we went home. I took his house key and told him to say goodbye to our 3 pets and get packing. The entire time he packed, I studied those phone records to find out dates, times, and if there was anyone else he was leaving out. He answered every question I asked, and it was then that I discovered that the sex offender and he had only had oral sex in my home, and that the actual sex was in the same parking lot he screwed the Frankie guy in. The wheels started turning, and the next day I walked over the church and sure enough spotted a camera. I spoke to a secretary at the church, a sweet old lady, and informed them about a registered sex offender having sex in their lot, and that not only was it a violation of his parole for indecent exposure, but that he was not allowed to be that close to school, and I provided the date. I was in luck. They had a digital 2-year loop system and started deleting day by day after it had been retained for 2 years. It was April 2020, and he first cheated with Frankie in May 2018, and the sex offender was in April 2019. I told them I was filing a police report and that probation would require a copy of it eventually. They said that they would save the file and allowed me a thumb drive of both days to submit with my police report. Within a month, the sex offender was locked up again, 2 down. I also filed a police report against the Frankie guy. The police said it was a relatively minor infraction, but since it was across from a school playground and a skate park, they would follow up, but there would be no jail time. I researched the hell out of Frankie and called him to confront him. He was smug and admitted to knowing about me the whole time. What he didn't know is that I had found out he had a job that required a security clearance, and he had several judgments against him, and collection agencies had been looking for him. Best $1 ever spent on data collection site. I didn't know why they couldn't find him, and just garnishing his 3 wages. But it ends up he was Hispanic and had 2 last names and was a junior. Plus, he frequently by his middle name Francisco, Frankie for short, so he got lost in the paperwork confusion. I sent a letter to the collection agencies providing his employer and current location and contact info, and then sent a copy to the police report about misdemeanor indecent exposure, for which he pled guilty, and it was a fine with community service, not considered a sex crime. His wages didn't get garnished, but only for 2 paychecks, because the misdemeanor was enough for him to lose his security clearance and get fired. 3 down. Then I contacted Ryan's family on his mother's side, pretending to be him from his Facebook account, making sure they knew he had fucked his cousin. It spread through the family like wildfire, and soon his cousin was contacting me because he couldn't get a hold of Ryan to ask why he would expose what they did. I just laughed and said that you shouldn't screw your cousins, especially when they are engaged, and that he messed around in my house, so now it was my turn for payback. 4 down. Lastly, I had already stopped payment, but since he was so close to finishing, I was sure his family would bail him out and pay the university. Like I said, indecent exposure is usually a slap on the wrist type misdemeanor. However, I remember some of the paperwork he signed to be mandated reporter, that you could lose teaching certification for documented acts of moral turpitude. I sent a copy of both police reports from the parking lot with still shots from the security footage clearly showing Ryan's face to the school district he had been student teaching in, and a copy to the Commission on Teachers' Credentials. Fifth and final down. Admittedly, I did all of this out of anger, but he shattered my sense of self-worth and made me incredibly bitter and untrusting after years of being generous and supporting him. Everywhere I looked in the town, I thought of Ryan and the cheating. I felt a terrible energy in my condo, knowing it all happened there. I stayed 9 months and I watched all 5 of their lives self-destruct. Then I sold my condo, making a nice profit, and I relocated. And then I relocated to the Pacific Northwest to start all over. One thing that is sad is I found out just recently that his ex, whose fiancé broke up with him, ended up committing suicide several months after I moved. It is too bad that his family was so close-minded to turn on their own son. But in the end, it's not my fault that he cheated on his fiancé by coming into my home at my fiancé's invitation to cheat. Suicide is never the answer to one's problems, and I hope the fiancé he cheated on doesn't blame herself and that only his family does, as they should. So TLDR, too long did not read. I emotionally and financially supported my ex through college and his teacher credential program for over 7 years, only to discover he had cheated on me with 4 different guys. One of them the day after he graduated, and then occasionally for nearly 2 years in my home while I was at work. I took my revenge. My ex lost his career before it even started, and our relationship. One affair partner lost his job and had bill collectors after him. Another lost his fiancé and was kicked out. A third was humiliated when his entire family found out he had sex with his cousin, and the fourth was put in jail for violating probation. Lesson: don't cheat and deceive, or fuck around and find out. And for those that haven't seen the original comments, yes, I did seek therapy. This was 4 years ago, and after 18 months of therapy, that didn't really help. I was referred to a new therapy for PTSD called ketamine infusion therapy, and it was like magic. In 6 sessions over 3 weeks, I was relieved of all my pent-up anger and resentment, and actually able to trust and date again. I'm now happily married and settled in the Pacific Northwest.